Hey and welcome everyone. Today on Skylines Summer Sessions, myself and Richard are joined by Sam Smith, who is an ADM on the Premier Support for Developers team at Microsoft. A very warm welcome, Sam. Great to have you on the show today. Today you're going to be talking about DevOps and what not to do, which is an interesting topic. So to kick things off, Sam, tell us a bit about yourself and the job you do at Microsoft.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me, Gregor and Richard. So my name is Sam Smith. I don't sing, but I work at Microsoft. Been at Microsoft for about 2 years, but I have about 20 years of software development experience, mostly in the Microsoft stack. But in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of DevOps with Azure DevOps and GitHub. And I'm a certified Azure architect, Azure developer, and Azure DevOps engineer. So my current areas of focus are developer productivity, automation, and leading DevOps transformations, especially with Azure DevOps and GitHub. I just wanted to say sort of upfront, while I work for Microsoft, these are my views, my opinions, and they don't necessarily represent the views of the entire organization I work for.
Cool, sounds good.
I have a lot of opinions.
That's what we need. That's good to hear. So DevOps means so many things to so many different people. Like I could ask Gregor what it means, I could ask you what it means, and everyone's different. So like, what does DevOps actually mean to you? Let's get one of these opinions of yours.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? And that's a great start, because I think that is one of the problems with DevOps, is that it means, it does mean so many different things to so many different people. And to some people, it means, some automated builds, and other people, it means they have, a Netflix situation where they're deploying 100 times a day. To me, DevOps is all about automation. It's about developer productivity, and it's a mindset of continuous improvement, experimentation, continuous learning, and I think when I start talking about things like automation, like a lot of customers will start to shrivel up a little bit, I guess, because they think I'm trying to replace people, and that's not the point of DevOps. It's about augmenting people and process, and I like to say automating the boring stuff so you can focus on the fun stuff.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. Focus on fun stuff, especially. So, Sam, what mistakes are people making when they aren't doing DevOps correctly?
Yeah, I see a lot of mistakes. I think the most common mistake I see is that people expect that once they start using Azure DevOps or Jenkins or go to GitHub, that the tool will solve all their problems, and that they are doing DevOps just from using the tool. When the truth is, the tool is a tiny part of the equation. It's like 10% of what DevOps is. The people and the process is the hard part. And that's what I tell people: don't underestimate the process and people change management required. And when we talk about culture change, we're really talking about behavior changes. If I'm asking you to automate something and you automate it, but then the next day you're commenting out tests, or the automation broke and you're not fixing it, that's kind of a problem, and we need to sort of address those mistakes.
One thing I always think is good is to have discipline.
Yeah, and this is meant to be a tool to help you, right? It's not meant to be it's not meant to be a process that is there for the sake of being a process. I mean, we've all done waterfall and been in situations where there's been too much process. This is, like I said before, it's meant to automate the boring stuff, and so you can really focus on much more mind-expanding and interesting topics.
Yeah, that's good. So you mentioned testing there and how people are like sort of disabling testing this day after. Could you go a bit more into automated testing and DevOps?
Sure. I mean, automated testing is probably the second biggest place that I see where people make mistakes as they implement DevOps. The definition of something like a unit test really differs, and we see a lot of people who say, I've got unit testing, but when we look a little bit closer, they don't have a single unit test. They don't even have a definition for what a unit test is. So it's really important to sort of have that testing strategy sort of there and have clear definitions of like a unit test and an integration test and a functional test, and really understanding sort of the right allocation of what you should have so that you're addressing it correctly. And as well as that, when tests fail, you've got two choices, right? You can fix it or you can delete it. But if you keep that failing test running for a long time, you're not going to really have a good, clear picture of how well your process is going, because it's going to look like it's been broken for a while.
Yeah, makes sense. So just a quick question. What is the definition between, or the difference between a unit test, integration test, and all of that, for the IT ops people who are watching?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Rich. I think the main thing is, when we talk about our testing strategy, the first thing we want to try and address is unit tests. And the reason is a unit test has no dependencies. Typically, it runs in milliseconds to seconds. It's almost instantaneous. And that's really important, because we're just testing such a micro piece of our code. We're testing that 1 + 1 = 2. We're not going to any databases. We're not going to any services. It's all sort of code. Versus sort of the next level of an integration test, where you are actually saying, hey, when I pass these parameters of 1 and 1 to my database or to a web service, does it process it and return 2 as I expect? And those types of tests, they can take seconds to sort of minutes to sort of run. And that's why it's really important that you focus on your unit tests. When you're writing some automation, you want to try and write that unit test first and do everything you can to write as much of unit tests as possible before you sort of jump up to the next level and say, I need an integration test. And you definitely need those integration tests, right? They're important to help to make sure that your product is working from end to end. But if you look at if you have 100 tests, for example, and 80 or 90 of them are unit tests, you're testing 80 or 90% of your product in 50 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds, and that's huge. You can test as you type. You get that continuous feedback, which is really important.
Yeah, I've certainly worked on projects in the past where tests have been failing and they've just been ignored for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then
that's important.
You have the chat about, will we remove them or will we fix them? And then nobody does anything, and they just sit there broken for months.
Yeah, and that's important from a multitasking perspective as well, because when you're writing that piece of code, that's when you're there. That's when you're plugged into exactly what you're trying to do. Versus if it comes back a week later or a month later, you've lost that context. And I don't know about everyone else. I have trouble remembering what I did yesterday or last week, let alone last month. So having those unit tests is a crutch for me, so that when I do have to change a piece of code, or even that specific piece of code, there's a test running over that to ensure that I haven't broken anything. And I know that saves me all the time, like in today's day and age when there's so many projects going on and so many initiatives. I can change a line of code and have confidence that it's that I am testing my whole product in seconds.
So let's talk a little bit more about testing, because I've worked in large companies who some people say they don't test anything. Some people say they should test everything. What's your sort of thoughts? Do you test the unit test? Do you do unit tests? Do you do integration tests and kind of end-to-end tests as well? Or?
Yeah. Everything is useful.
Kind of thoughts on that?
Everything is useful, but I think doing as many unit tests up front is going to be useful, because as I said, those tend to run sort of in a very quick amount of time. I do have functional tests as well. That's using products such as Selenium or JMeter, which are sort of doing much more comprehensive. Hey, I'm going to browse to my website. I'm going to log in. I'm going to do some operation. Maybe I'm going to put an item in my shopping cart and check out, and make sure that everything works from end to end. Versus a unit test, which may be saying, hey, if I add this item to my shopping cart, does it get added? When I delete it, does it remove it? Much more sort of smaller pieces. So yeah, having that full end to end is important, but it's really important to sort of understand your technologies and know that you can't write unit tests with Selenium. You can't write unit tests with JMeter. You need to use the right tool for the right jobs.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move on and talk a little bit about one thing that I really like. I really like infrastructure as code. So have you kind of done that using Azure DevOps before? If so, what kind of tools have you used? Do you do ARM templates with PowerShell, or Terraform, or Pulumi, or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And infrastructure as code is the third area that I often see people, when they adopt DevOps, ignoring or underestimating. I tend to use ARM templates and PowerShell to sort of call Azure CLI. and some of those other fun tools. But I think what's really important with infrastructure as code is that as part of your DevOps pipelines, you can actually automate building that infrastructure, and not just building it initially, but maintaining it. There's this concept called configuration drift, where you build, your web server or your database server, and it's perfect on day one. But over the next couple of weeks and months and years, as lots of people log in and make changes and add their own applications to it, the configuration drifts ever so slightly. People are doing trial and error and they're trying to get something to work, so they turn settings on and off, and they don't realize that they forgot to turn something off or turn something back on again. And what infrastructure as code really does is that every time you do your deployment, it's sort of resetting that configuration and helping you to make sure that your product is running in the same way you expect. The other really important thing about infrastructure as code is, for our developers, we talk about how we want to have truly isolated development environments where I can replicate my production environment, or I can work as close to my production environment as possible. With infrastructure as code, it's really easy to spin up a new development environment just for my developers. And I'm not talking about containers at all. Like containers, they definitely help address this, but just from if I need a new VM, or I need a new web app, or even an Azure SQL database, or a MongoDB, I can use infrastructure as code to deploy that into a new area. I can run my tests, I can do my development, and I can tear it all down, just for a couple bucks.
You wrote blog posts on this, did you not, for doing it with a PR? Does that remember? If I recall.
I have, yeah. Yeah, I wrote a blog post where every time I did a PR, it would dynamically create a pull request environment in Azure just for that environment, so I could do my full end-to-end functional tests on a complete environment. Database, Redis, lots of APIs, a CDN, all the networking, everything that would be in a single environment. Yeah.
And you can put the test in the pipeline as well, in the DevOps pipeline, or was that separate to the build?
So I have lots of levels of testing, and testing is obviously a gigantic topic. I tend to put most of my testing in the build, in the continuous integration. So when I run my build, it does all of the automated tests. And that's where all my unit tests run. It's where all my integration tests run. But then if I want to run other types of tests, like smoke tests, as I deploy to my QA environment, for example, I want to have some automation there to verify that all of my services are running. So I have a smoke test, which is essentially a functional sort of Selenium test that will, ping Redis to make sure it's available. It'll ping my web app to make sure that it can return data in my website, just to make sure that everything is working as expected. And that's where, the continuous learning is really important, because I can be deploying and I can do a deployment to production, and then for whatever reason, one of my services will break. And that's the learning moment. That's when I try to go back and say, what automated tests should I have added to make sure that this doesn't happen again, so that I can catch it before it gets to production. It's okay to fail in DevOps, right? We just don't want to fail to production. We want to fail before production.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying is it's a continuous learning experience, DevOps. Once you create your pipelines, it's never finished. You just always got to improve.
Yeah. It's like, in fact, a lot of DevOps is based on lean manufacturing concepts, where, you fix one end of your pipeline or your process, and that's going to cause sort of a ripple effect that may break something further along. Or it may now cause another issue that was sort of minor to now be more important. And it's prioritization. But yeah, continuous learning is really important. Mistakes are okay, but if you keep making the same mistake over and over again, that's not okay. That'll get you fired.
Yeah, we don't want that.
No, I don't want that. I want to ask you a little question that's kind of close to my heart. What about deploying databases within DevOps? I know a lot of people don't really do this. What's your thoughts on that, and have you done that before?
So I think deploying databases is probably one of the hardest things in DevOps. And the reason being is you're trying to maintain state the whole time. Like, your data is really important. The last thing you want to do is delete your production database. We've all done it once in our careers. You don't want to do it again, right? Like, make that mistake once, not twice. so that adds an extra complexity versus deploying a service or deploying a website, where you don't tend to have that state, that data involved. So it's definitely a mindset shift. It definitely takes more time. What I like to frame this as is, imagine you're running a Netflix type of operation where you have millions and millions of users. You can never have any downtime, right? You have to make sure that service is always running. So what that means is you can't make destructive changes to your database. You can only make non-destructive changes. So what that means is, from a SQL perspective, for example, you can't change column names. You can't delete column names, but you can add column names, because adding a column name isn't destructive. Now, database administrators tend to not like this because they like to have clean databases. But the name of the game is sort of changing a little bit, right? Because the goal of DevOps is to deliver value to our end users. It's not to have the cleanest database in the world. Our customers care about their Netflix system and the fact that they want to, get video running. They don't want to, in the middle of their in their Office episode, to suddenly get a message saying, "Sorry, the service is down while we reboot the database." No, they want to keep going. So I think that's really important. And I think that's why we're starting to see more databases, NoSQL, Cosmos DB, MongoDB databases become more popular, because they ask, essentially sort of schemaless. And it's a little bit easier to sort of make those changes and add those new columns without having to sort of bring down your whole database as you go.
Sounds good, yeah. Something we need to look into a bit more, because we do like to change SQL column names quite a bit. So yeah, that's definitely some good insights there.
Sam, what are the areas you see people making the most mistakes in? What are people not good at doing when it comes to DevOps?
I think they're kind of, it's kind of a maturity level thing. And I think some customers are actually, one of the things I'm realizing is some customers are okay with the idea that they're not going to be a Netflix type of shop, or, they don't need to be, right? Some of them just need some automation to run their CI and CD, and they run it once a month, and that's fine. And other people, that they are striving to be one of those places where they can do 100 deployments a day. But that does require a continuous investment. It's not something you just do and you're done. It's a continuous journey. You need a lot of people who are devoted full time to monitoring production and continually learning from their mistakes and trying to improve it. And so I think the biggest mistake people make is they think that they're going to go all the way, and they're not being realistic with whether or not they need to. And if they do want to go all the way, they don't necessarily have the people assigned to the project in a full-time way. They have too many other distractions or other projects that are sort of not allowing them to do it properly. And that's all of these things, right? It's really easy to say. It's much harder to implement. That's the fun part about change management and cultural change is it's really easy to read about it in a book, or here's someone like me talk about it, but to actually implement it, it's hard. And it takes a long time. And some of your people are probably not going to enjoy it, and they're going to quit and go somewhere else. And other people will love it and double down and become your champions.
Yeah, that's cool. So, what are the sort of top 5 recommendations for DevOps? You sort of tell everyone, what are the top 5 things we should all know about DevOps?
So I think top 5 things for me would be, number 1, making sure everyone is on the same page about what DevOps means for your organization, and that's all about sort of level setting and communication. Number 2 is being realistic about the process change, which probably means you need executive support. You need to be realistic about the way people's roles are going to change. About you need to communicate this a lot, and it's not just a stand up every morning. That's just part of the process. That's not the solution, right? The third one is automated testing and making sure that people are realistic with what they have, and fixing what they have and maintaining what they have. The fourth one is infrastructure as code, which I find is often ignored and is really important to help accelerate your development and make sure that you have the same environments over and over again. And the last mistake I make is that people aren't continuously learning. What I say, mistakes are okay, just don't keep making the same mistakes. Yeah.
So Sam, you obviously know a lot about DevOps. Is there any kind of books that you've read or any kind of resources that you would recommend? I know you've kind of read quite a lot, so what kind of books have you read on DevOps that you would recommend to our viewers and listeners?
Oh yeah. So I definitely recommend the Phoenix Project. Is my thing gonna let me use it? Phoenix Project is a great start. Another book I would recommend is the DevOps Handbook.
Yep.
And the third book I would recommend is Accelerate. These are all excellent books to sort of get you started into DevOps. So you can see that I always have them within arm's length because I refer to them often. DevOps is obviously a gigantic topic and it means everything. And I don't know everything. And a lot of what I learn is from doing. So I think getting started, creating your own pipeline, and as you finish every task, saying, how can I make this better? What would I need to make this faster and more scalable and more resilient? Will sort of lead you to the next most important thing. One of the things I've been doing is I've been running a blog, and I call my blog samlearnsazure.blog. And on that blog, I started by building a simple .NET website and web service connected to a SQL database. And over the last nearly 2 years, I've been sort of adding features to that sort of weekly almost. I thought I'd be done after 6 months. After 2 years, I have a long backlog of sort of like, 30 or 40 items, and I regularly go through that backlog and delete items. There's plenty to do. There's always plenty to do. And I'm not even building features. I'm just implementing infrastructure and focusing on developer productivity so that I know that when I make a change or add a new feature, I can be confident that the rest of it is not going to break and I can push that to production with no problems.
Which is super important. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of been working on projects in the past where that's not the case. And when I check a change in, I kind of break an environment because it's not rigorously tested and it's not using infrastructure as code and things like that. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and developer productivity is really underrated too. Because if you think about it, if you save 5 minutes a day for every developer in your organization, that's 25 to 30 hours a year that you're saving. If you multiply that by 100 developers or 1,000 developers, and that's just 5 minutes. I mean, I know that everyone who's watching or listening here is worked on projects where things take 8 hours to run or process. Imagine you take that 8-hour process and you get it down to 5 minutes. That turnaround, that automation saving, that developer productivity is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been told in the past, like previous boss said, all unit tests must run in under 5 minutes, things like that, because they used to take a lot longer. And if you take the time to kind of fix these tests, then yeah, it's win-win.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And now those 5-minute unit tests weren't unit tests, right?
Yeah, that's true. Right, okay, time for some fun questions. So we've got a couple of fun questions for you just before we wrap up. So a little birdie told me that you used to play in a band. So tell us a bit more about that.
Oh yeah, so I don't sing, but I play guitar in a band, 5 bands, I guess, over the last couple of years. I don't currently play in a band for just run out of time, really. But yeah, I used to play in pubs, recorded some original punk, rock, Pixies-like music, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. And then a couple of cheesy covers bands playing a lot of 80s and 90s bad music. Yeah.
I like the 80s and 90s. It's good music.
Well, some of it is.
Yeah. So I also hear you're a bit of a Lego geek, which you sort of say it's for your son, but we all know it's you really, isn't it?
Yeah, the secret's out of the bag, yeah.
Yeah.
It's something fun about just building those little bricks that you can't stop. But, yeah.
What's your
Star Wars? Yeah.
I was going to say, have you got the big Star Wars one?
We have the Death Star that
Nice.
we managed to nab in one of those flash sales on Amazon Day one day. We definitely have all the spaceships, and you know, for Christmas I got the giant Yoda.
Oh,
it's
wow.
about this big. In fact, it's not behind me today, but it's usually behind me. Yeah, it's definitely fun to put those bricks together for whatever reason. It's quite satisfying.
Yeah, I guess it's quite a nice stress relief as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no one who doesn't like Lego, let's be honest.
It's
Something
true.
fun about holding something too, especially when we work in IT and you can't necessarily hold things that you build, right?
Mm.
Building, I just like building stuff. Hands-on building is always stuff that I like.
Yeah.
Cool. So Sam, thanks for your time as always. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. Myself and Richard have learned a fair bit on DevOps and kind of best practices. So it's definitely something we need to look into a bit more. So thanks for your time and appreciate you coming on our show.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys. Have a good summer.
Thanks, Sam. And you.